I did my project on Oysters Bienville. Oysters Bienville gets its name from the founder of New Orleans, Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville. As you can see, there's a picture of him here. Oysters Bienville was created at Arnold's restaurant in the 1930s. It's an oyster dish that is baked, includes toppings such as garlic, onion, mushrooms, and sometimes bacon and chives, but can vary from family to family. Finally, it's usually topped with a breadcrumb mixture or something to add a little more texture to it. Firstly, make sure you preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, you're going to want to chop up some mushrooms. So you'll need 1/4 of a cup, so I used about 1 or 2. I already had one cut, and here's me cutting one now. You're going to want to cut it into slices and then stack the slices on top of each other and cut down. And then I just held my knife against the board so it could be chopped into finer pieces like the recipe said. Also make sure to keep your fingers away from the knife and not under it, especially when you're pressing it down on the board. The ER is not included in this recipe. Now you're going to need 1/4 cup of onion. You're going to want to cut halfway through, and then you're going to turn it and do the same, but make sure it's parallel to these lines you're cutting. And then in the next clip, you'll see me cutting down and letting the cubes release, and I only did this for half of the onion because you only really need about that much, so you can save the rest for a later recipe. Now you're going to start preparing your lemon. You'll just need a whole lemon, and you're going to cut off the ends of it. So make sure you cut off all of that. And then you're going to want to hold it up and cut it down the center. And you should have 2 halves. You're going to take the half with the skin and have it facing up. So you can also cut that in half. I left it in 4ths for now, but you can cut it as many as you want. And towards the end of the recipe, I even cut it more. Next, just cut 1/4 cup of shrimp. Just kind of chop the shrimp up and make sure they're kind of fine, and then you're pretty much good to go. Now you're going to want to make your breadcrumb mixture, so you're going to need 1/3 cup of panko, which is a Japanese breadcrumb, and you can add more as needed. I even add a little more here. And then you're going to need 2 tablespoons of Parmesan cheese, preferably freshly grated, but I just took a big handful and kind of added more as the recipe went on. So it doesn't have to be exact just because it's the mixture, but make sure you have a pretty decent ratio of cheese to breadcrumb. Now you're going to want to separate an egg because you need an egg yolk. What I did was just crack open the egg on the counter, and you're going to want to peel up slightly but not sticking your entire finger in to get the shell off. And then I was just putting it back and forth and using the shell to kind of put some of the white into the bowl. Next, you're going to want to start adding stuff to your saucepan. And the first thing to do is add 3 tablespoons of oil and make sure it's on medium-high. I kind of spread the oil around the pan, and then I added my 1/4 cup of onions I chopped up earlier. And you want to cook those until they're tender, which is usually ranging from 2 to 3 minutes. But you can kind of just watch it, and it's not really that big of a deal if it were to stay in a little bit longer. Once you're done mixing your onions and making sure those are all cooked, you're going to add your ingredients. So 1/4 cup of mushrooms you did from earlier. And you're going to want to stir it around just with all the ingredients after you add them. And then next I added 1 teaspoon of minced garlic. And instead of a clove, we equated 1 clove being chopped up to 1 teaspoon. Your next ingredient is going to be your shrimp. So that was also the 1/4 of the cup from earlier. And you're going to want to mix this around. And then you're going to want to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which equates to about 10 turns. And then you're going to do the same for pepper, but do 5 for 1/4 of a teaspoon. Now you're going to want to add your flour in, which is a tablespoon, and you're going to want to pour it on top. And as you mix it, try to get towards the bottom of the pan so you can make like a slight roux, not a full-on, just kind of get that texture you're looking for. After I finished mixing my flour from the last clip, which only took about 20 seconds after it cut out, I'm adding my 3 tablespoons of chicken stock. So what you're going to want to do is just pour it in and kind of mix it around a little, make sure it really gets soaked up and all in the toppings. And next, after you finish stirring it, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of milk, and this will help give it a creamy texture that we're looking for. So here I am adding the milk now. This also doesn't have to be exact. You can kind of eyeball it. And once you do this, you're just going to want to stir it for about a minute or two. And I don't think you want to see me stirring for a minute or two, so here it will cut out. Once you're done stirring, you should have a creamy texture like the one shown here. And we're going to pour our egg, which I also beat it up to make it easier to pour, and put this on top of the mixture. Keyword on top, so it doesn't hit directly on the pan and it won't fry, so make sure you do it slowly. Also, if you haven't already, take the pan off the burner and move it to one where it is not on, so it won't cook. Okay, now is the step where you're going to start putting your oysters onto the pan. In the beginning of the recipe I used, it said to put rock salt, which we were going to do, but my dad said with the type of pan we had, we didn't have to, so that's kind of an optional step. But if you were to, you would put 1/3 of a cup. Doesn't have to really be exact, but just make sure it's a flat, good sized layer of rock salt. And I placed on 6 earlier and then realized I could fit 10. So kind of, even though the recipe is for 12, I spread it across 10 and I found out that it was fine. So you can always just adjust or put more or less filling in some, depending on your taste. Okay, now that we have our oysters set, I'm going to fill all of them up. You're going to want to take a spoon and just kind of take a spoonful. It can be bigger or less depending on how much you have or want in the oysters. And you're just going to want to make sure this is spread evenly and just kind of make sure it's on top of the oyster too. So in this clip, I started to put the breadcrumb mixture on top. You're kind of going to want to make sure they get individually in each oyster, so stack it up on top, and then towards the end, you can kind of just throw it all over the pan with the excess you have. There's no certain amount, but it usually comes out better if you add more. To put the oysters in the oven, so after it's preheated, put it into 16 to 18 minutes, and then they should be done. You can't really see it with the screen, but here they are in the oven, and there's my dad's leg in the background, but oysters, yeah. And about 17 minutes later, the oysters are done. So you're going to kind of want to leave them in the oven for about a minute because the pan gets really, really hot and so do the shells themselves. So once you are ready, though, make sure to have oven mitts or some sort of protection on and take other safety precautions so you don't get yourself burned. Here's just an overshot of the oysters, kind of make sure they're all cooked through about the same. And now I'm just squeezing lemon over and putting some pieces for decoration on the sides and for when I eat them later. And then I sprinkled some more Parmesan, and I would show me arranging the plate, but keep in mind the shells are very hot. And when I mean very hot, I mean very hot. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my video and maybe you'll try it out for yourself sometime.